Alright, so as you can see on the bench today, I've got two of the flatback carbs that you'll find in some of the older McCulloch chainsaws. I just thought I'd do a video on how I rebuild these primers. I found a way that works pretty good to rebuild these things, and they work fantastic once the primer works. These carburetors always kind of get a bad rap because these primers will leak fuel. It'll fill up the air box and the saw, and the primer won't work at all, and it makes it extremely hard to start the saw unless you put some fuel down the carb first. So I've got two of them. As you can see, this one's from a 380 and this is from a 176. I'm gonna take them apart and I'm gonna rebuild the one and use the other one as like a demonstration. So first off, you just take this off. Move the primer, obviously. Once you get these screws off, it should kind of just fall off. And there's usually these two O-rings. They'll either be sitting on here or they'll be in the little recess in the carburetor. Those are junk. We're going to replace those because there's no way we're going to seal it in this thing. And then this in here, this is a rubber seat. You usually find these in like till it's an HL needle and seat. A lot of times they'll have a rubber seat. This is the exact same seat that's in those. So if you have just a spare carb laying around, you can steal it out of there. Otherwise, you can buy like a pack of 20 of these off of Amazon for like pretty cheap. So we take that out, and as you can probably see, there's this little ball that went flying. Just don't lose that. So this is the check valve, one of the check valves in this pump. This is just a plunger style pump, so there's got to be two check valves for each one. This is one of the check valves, and I have seen these seats. They look perfectly fine when you pull them out, but it will not seal. So no matter what you do, get rid of this, put a new one in, because it'll cause you problems if you don't. And then down in here is a little tiny spring that goes on, the ball sits on that spring. I just pull that out, otherwise it could potentially fall out in the boot. So we've got this, we can pop this out of here. And that slides out of there. And so on the primer, so it sits like that. This is the fuel inlet, that's fuel outlet. Now I have one that I took apart here just kind of for demonstration purposes. I cut it apart to figure out how these things work. So you've got spring. Spring sits in the bottom of this thing. Sits down there. And this is one that I actually have rebuilt. So this is ready to like slide in with those. So this goes down in there, obviously. And then the spring goes first. And the spring is what pushes this back. So this basically, originally these would have what Mac called V packing. So it's like an O-ring shaped kind of like a V. And once you push on this, the V kind of spreads and seals off and creates pressure to push the fuel out of the little cylinder. When you release, it kind of collapses down, and because you're creating a larger cavity on this side of the primer, it will draw fuel in from here past the V packing into the bottom side here. So essentially what I've done with the O-rings, because the V packings are kind of expensive and they're really hard to find, what I've done with the O-rings is you can see they're kind of sloppy on here. They have to have that play because the O-ring is now forming your second check valve. So when you push this in and you push this down, the O-rings push up against the back side here of this and seals, forcing the fuel out of this hole past our little seat and ball here, and then it just kind of shoots right out of the carburetor here. It shoots straight out into the intake of the saw. So after these are rebuilt, you can't just put the carburetor back in the saw, hook up the fuel line, and pump this a bunch of times to prime the carburetor. It doesn't work like that, because your fuel inlet comes in here and it goes like straight through the side here and connects right into the primer. So the primer does not pump fuel through the carburetor at all. It goes, fuel comes straight into the carburetor, to the primer, other side of the primer, and then back straight out of the carburetor. It will not prime the carburetor for you. So what we do to get these things apart, because there are two collars that are press fit in here. So if you I drill a 3/16 hole in the back here, and then you're going to use something to press it out. I just happen to have this shortened Allen wrench is what it was. 3/16 hole with 3/16 Allen. Put the Allen in your hole after you're done, and then I usually just use a vise or something and pop everything up. So I'm not going to show how to drill a hole. Everybody knows how to drill a hole. Just make sure it's centered when you do, because you are drilling down through the center of the spring. And you don't want to catch on the spring and goof your spring up, because then it definitely won't work if there's no spring tension. So I'm going to drill a hole quick, and then I'll be right back, because everybody knows how to drill. Alright, so I drilled the hole in this, as you can see. This is what it looked like before. And then the hole in there. And then, also I forgot to mention, when I push it out of the vise, I usually use a socket with a 1/2-inch square drive, because these are 1/2-inch square, and that holds it nicely for you. And it gives you space down in the bottom to let everything push out. So I put this in there, and then I just put it in the vise jaws, and then you just close the vise jaws and it'll push everything out. It does take quite a bit of force to get that to pop out. I have actually broken one of the plungers before trying to get everything to pop out, because they are very tight. So this is what it looks like once you get it out. This one is actually in really good shape. Like, normally this part of the primer is just all mushy goop, but this one's actually in really nice shape. So, and then this is the outer collar. Just slide everything off pretty much. Here's one of the O-rings. Surprisingly, this one is still rubbery. Normally you can squeeze them and they just shatter like glass kind of. So this is garbage. Don't reuse them. This is your inner collar. There's that tiny hole there. That just makes it easier for fuel to get in there. It doesn't block the fuel off if you don't line this hole up, but it just an added passage for fuel to get through. And then we got the inner O-ring. This O-ring just seals everything up when the primer is not in use. When it's in the full retract mode, the spring pushes this forward and the O-ring will be butted up between the ledge here on the plunger and this, so it will completely seal off the inlet of the primer so that in theory it doesn't leak. Now we all know that to not be 100% true all the time, but when the seals are all good, that's how it's supposed to work. Okay, and then this is one of those V packets. Let's see if I can get this off. Sometimes it's pretty tough. Alright, so there's the V packing. See how it kind of looks like a cup? I don't know if you can see that. But it's not square, it's kind of angled on the edges. But that is also here. We are not reusing that because that one obviously did not work. And this is what we're left with. So there are two different kinds of plungers that I've seen. There's this kind that it looks like it's steel, but it's not. It's not magnetic at all. I don't actually know what it is. And then there are the aluminum kinds, like I showed you this one here. You can see the difference. They're slightly different, but same principle. So these ones that look like they're steel have a notch here. Oops, focus. That notch is good. We need the notch there. So if you have this style, you have to, that notch right there is not supposed to be there. That's from the one that I cut apart. So disregard that. You will have to cut a notch in this lower shoulder. We have to have a notch there, otherwise the fuel is not going to be able to get around here quick enough, and it will make for a really slow reacting primer. So now you're probably thinking, well, nice, you made a hole. That's not going to work. What I do is I weld the hole shut. I have the ability to weld aluminum. You could, I suppose, just put some sort of like a plug in there, like a set screw, and just Loctite it in there. I'm sure that would work perfectly fine. I have the ability to weld aluminum, so I just weld it up because that's the most fail-safe thing I can think of. It's obviously less likely to leak than a plug. With a plug, it could potentially fall out of there at some point or start to leak again. But I am going to weld this up. I'll probably do this one at the same time, just off video, because I'll show you how to do one, so you can do two. And then I'll be back and show you guys how I place the O-rings on there and put everything back together.